Hello, 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 everybody. I hope you're all well. Welcome to our webinar. We're really glad to see you all today. Can you please notify us in the comments if you hear and see us well? Is everything all right? Are we live? Hello, Thais. Hello. Well, I guess at least we're live. We have people in the chat. And while we're waiting for the others to join, those who already see us, please type in the chat, in the comments, where are you watching us from? Where are you right now? We know the webinars are the most convenient because you can watch them from any point of the world, from any corner, but we would like to know where you are. Everything is all right. Can see and hear well. Very good. We're very glad that you're joining us. Great. Daniel Jr. has joined us from Portugal. Welcome, Daniel. I hope you're watching us with your family. You are a very frequent guest at our DX Tech Talks, and you have become the social media star after we witnessed you coming to us with your children and your wife. And we really hope that you have a nice family TV time right now, grabbing your tea or any other warm drink that you have at home. I see people from Georgia, Bulgaria, welcome, welcome, Poland, Braga, Portugal again. We're so glad to see so many people from our actual locations. As you know, this webinar is organized by dxExperts, and we have R&D centers all over the world, and our top locations are Tbilisi, Georgia, Porto, Portugal, and Sofia, Bulgaria. Of course, this is not the whole geography, but in terms of DX Tech Talk, these are three top-notch and the biggest locations that we've ever had in terms of having offline and online events. So we're really glad to see the loyal audience from those places. Oh, Daniel tells us that school classes prevent his kids from watching this. Afraid be not. Even if you are missing this webinar today, I'm pretty sure if you're watching this right now, the recording has reached you correctly. So yeah, it doesn't matter if you're here with us or if you're watching this in the recording. We are really grateful to dedicate. We're really grateful for dedicating some time to our webinar, because today we're going to talk about very important and very complex things, all dedicated to quality assurance. So since we see a lot of comments, and Lukasz Mati, I'm really sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong, but this person is writing to us from Slovakia. I've never been to Slovakia, but I dream of going there. So thank you for your comment. And I really hope you're going to enjoy our event today. So welcome again to DX Tech Talk. My name is Maria, and today I will be hosting the event. DX Tech Talk, as I've already said, is a series of free tech meetups organized by a fintech company, dxExperts. We specialize in development of financial software solutions and services in the global capital markets industry. We have been founded in 2002, and we have R&D centers in Jersey City, Porto, Vilnius, Munich, Dublin, Tbilisi, Sofia, and Istanbul. If you heard if you heard your city name, put the like on this video. I will be glad. So we launched this project to be in touch with the tech community and share expertise in fintech and discuss our projects, technologies, and tools. So dxExperts has tech communities in Portugal, Bulgaria, and Georgia. where we organize offline meetups. So we'll be glad to see you there in person. Usually we record our presentations from offline events and share them here on this YouTube channel. So you can check any talk from any city that we've had the offline event in, and see it on this YouTube channel. And of course, YouTube is not the only channel of communication for dev experts. You can follow us on social media on meetup.com, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and even TikTok to stay in touch and learn about the upcoming events. So today, we have two wonderful presentations around 25 minutes each. Feel free to use our chat to ask your questions. We will have a Q&A session after each talk, but we're going to give to each speaker for about 10 minutes of question and answering time. And if you have more questions to ask, feel free to reach out to them. They are going to share their information, how to reach out to them during their presentation. So please be attentive. So without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker. Let's give a warm welcome to Inna Kamashvili, who is an ISTQB certified QA engineer with 4 years of experience. And right now, she is passionate about accessibility in testing. And it's time for her to speak for herself. Inna, please share your screen. The stage is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so today we're going to talk about accessibility. My name is Ina, and I am ISTQB certified tester with 4 years of experience in testing web and mobile applications on different projects. Currently, I work as accessibility QA at Dev Experts. I'm really passionate about this field, and I'm really happy to have this opportunity to share some of my knowledge and experience with you. But before we jump into our topic, I'd like to offer special thanks to my co-author, Maxim Khalizov, who is also our accessibility engineer, who helped me a great deal about this presentation. Thank you so much, Maxim. Let's see, what do we have on our plate? Well, first of all, I'm going to give you a brief introduction about what accessibility is and why it is important. Then we're going to discuss accessibility team structure, main roles, and tasks and responsibilities. We're going to see what types of documentation this team provides and use, and of course, accessibility testing tools that the team uses in day-to-day life. We're also going to see how AI can come into the picture and help with the testing. Let's go one by one. There are lots of different definitions out there on the internet, but I picked this one because I think it emphasizes that not only people with disabilities, but all of us can benefit from accessible environment. So accessibility ensures that all people, regardless of ability, can interact with the information or services provided. As accessibility is a pretty long word, a numeronym for it was created. As you can see on the slide, 11 in the middle represents 11 letters between A and Y, and we have this lovely L word for accessibility, which we're going to use throughout the presentation. Why is accessibility so important, and why are we talking so much about it? Well, according to the World Health Organization, 1.3 billion people experience significant disabilities, and that is 1 in every 6 of us. That's quite a number. But behind those numbers, there are real people who can be famous, like those in my slides, or just ordinary people like you and me. Making environment accessible will help those people to integrate successfully into our community and benefit and even contribute to it. There are lots of types of disabilities, but they are mostly grouped according to our senses. So we have vision disabilities, like, for example, blind, low vision, or colorblind people. We have hearing disabilities like deaf and hard of hearing. physical or motor disabilities, like, for example, problems with fine control, involuntary movements, including tremors, and many others. And also cognitive or neurological disabilities like dyslexia and learning impairments, and also others. Along with those that I mentioned, there are also temporary or situational disabilities, which basically can happen to all of us. For example, it can be broken arm or aging, or situation when you have one free hand while you are driving, or you're opposed to very bright sunlight and you have to message a friend, so you have to adjust the screen of your phone. You forgot your mouse at home, which happens to me a lot, and you have to navigate through all the websites via only keyboard. So here you can see that all of the people benefit from accessibility. On the other hand, accessibility can also be good for business. There are countries who have accessibility laws, for example, United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Spain, Israel, and implementing accessibility will reduce the risk of legal complications. It will also bring more clients to the company. Searching engines like, for example, Google, pay attention to the usability of the websites, and as accessibility is a part of usability, the company and the website can gain higher CEO ranking. The company will stand out if it implements accessibility, and that will enhance the image and reputation of it. And in the end, it's just the right thing to do. I mentioned some countries that have accessibility laws. Well, it's much more easier to be in compliance with those laws now that we have Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG for short. This is basically a bunch of guidelines and success criteria with lots and lots of techniques which help accessibility teams to make the websites be in compliance with those success criteria. Before we even open WCAG, we have to know, how do people with disabilities actually use our websites? Well, here is when assistive technologies come into the picture. There are lots of assistive technologies according to the disabilities people may have. Some of them are listed here. We have, for example, screen readers for blind users, and magnification applications for people with low vision, closed captioning services for people hard of hearing, and electronic pointing devices for people with motor disabilities. So we have to consider that people with disabilities mostly navigate with keyboard keys. They use tab and arrow keys to jump from one component to another, and they also use enter and spacebar keys to activate a button or a link. There are also many keyboard shortcuts specially created for those people. Let's expand a bit on screen readers. Well, screen reader is a software that renders visual information into speech. Nowadays, we have screen readers created for every operating system that currently exists. So we have JAWS, NVDAs, and Narrator for Windows. We have VoiceOver for macOS and iOS, TalkBack for Android, and Orca for Linux. It is very important when you're choosing screen reader to consider that screen readers work best in the particular combination with the browsers. For example, NVDA works best with Chrome, while VoiceOver will work best with Safari. How can we make elements on our websites accessible for the screen readers? Well, first of all, we have to design intuitive components based on the best practices and user experience. We have to create correct HTML and CSS markup and use ARIA attributes and roles where it is necessary. We can also add dynamics to the elements using JavaScript or where needed. I named ARIA. So ARIA is Accessible Reach Internet Applications, which is basically a set of attributes and roles that we can give to our elements to make them more accessible. Now, I want you to imagine for a moment that you can't see the screen. You're navigating with a keyboard and the information about the website you receive from the screen reader announcements. So you will probably want to know what is the element that you are standing on and what will happen if you activate it. Here are some examples of how can we make icon button accessible. For example, if we have just a div element with a SVG, an icon in it, our screen reader will just skip this element, and the user will never know that it even exists. Another example is the same div element, but we add a row and a label to it. So the screen reader will focus on that element and will announce delete button, which is correct. It is highly recommended to use native HTML elements where it is possible, of course. Here we have an example of a native button element, and the screen reader will focus on that element and will read that it is a button, but we didn't provide a name for it. So the last example is the best one in this case. It uses native HTML element, and it also has ARIA label delete. So the screen reader will read delete button, and that is all the information the user needs to make proper actions. Now, who does the magic? Who makes the websites accessible for the screen readers and keyboard navigation? It is definitely accessibility team. There are lots of positions and titles on the internet that differ from company to company, but I chose these ones because they are mostly widely spread. So we have accessibility analysts who are responsible for identifying, assessing, and resolving accessibility issues. We have accessibility engineers who basically design accessible components and also help developers to implement them in the code. Accessibility testers spot accessibility bugs. They ensure that their websites are in compliance with the guidelines and success criteria, and they also make sure that overall platform is not impacted by new implementation or bug fixes. Accessibility managers guide overall working process of the team. Sometimes the projects are small and the company cannot afford to hire the whole accessibility team. In this case, they may have only one person, accessibility expert, who will do all the works. It is highly recommended to have people with disabilities in accessibility team, or at least have them as consultants, because those are the people who use assistive technologies on a daily basis, and they know much more tips and tricks than the regular testers. It is important also to educate the developers about accessibility, or to hire those that have prior experience in accessibility. That will improve the communication with accessibility team. It is nice to have bug reports reviewed by accessibility engineers, because those are the guys who have technical knowledge and can add possible solutions to your expected results. Here are the main tasks of accessibility team. We can definitely name usability and accessibility testing here. Sometimes we have issues that are not exactly the bugs, but they can improve overall accessibility, excuse me, on the project. Documentation development is also one of the tasks, but the most important, I think, is education of other teams and of the company overall about accessibility. Now let's expand a bit on documentation. Why it is so important? Well, first of all, it helps us to track the progress of the team. It supports collaboration. It makes the team members be on the same page and eliminates duplicative work. It's very nice to have documentation when you are onboarding new people to the project, because it facilitates knowledge transfer. Here are some examples of documentation that accessibility team may have. Of course, different teams may have different types and kinds of documentation, but here are the following. If we want to know how the project works overall, we can go and check it in project documentation. If we are interested in how specific components work, we can use storybook documentation for that. How do we test? We describe in our test cases, and if we have some inconsistencies, we create defect reports. To show the results of the teamwork, we prepare accessibility conformance report. So let's expand a bit about Storybook. This is a tool that gives us a visual representation of the component, and you can go and play with it and test it even before it is implemented. It is very important to have it for developers, for accessibility engineers, and also for testers. There is also an option to add documentation file to Storybook in which you can describe the component, to the necessary attributes, and also ways of navigation to that component and inside of it. You can also give explanations of complex solutions made while creating this component. Accessibility conformance reports, on the other hand, can be required by the client, or sometimes accessibility teams just want to have it to show the level of accessibility on the project. There are free templates of a conformance report on the internet that you can use. The main part of it is WCAG part, divided into three according to the conformance levels of WCAG, for example, level A, AA, AAA, and each success criteria can be marked with one of the following conformance levels. We have supports, partially supports, and does not support, which I guess is pretty much understandable. Not applicable is used when we don't have specific functionality on our project. For example, on our project, we don't have videos. So all the success criteria that are related to videos, the captions, and so on, will be marked as not applicable. Not evaluated is used, for example, if the company decides that they want to be in compliance with A and AA levels. So AAA success criteria will all be marked with as not evaluated. Now we've come to the most interesting part of our presentation, accessibility testing tools. As I was saying, we use screen readers a lot to gain real user experience about the website. We also use color contrast analyzers to check if the website is accessible for colorblind people. There are also automation tools, but they don't guarantee 100% of coverage. So we have here xTools, Accessibility Toolkit, Wave, Accessibility Insights. Some of those are open source, some have paid versions. Here we have a screen of color contrast analyzer. It has input fields for foreground and background colors. You can input hex or whatever format you like into those fields, and the tool will give you the contrast ratio between those two colors, and will also pass or fail particular success criteria related to this. Accessibility Toolkit is one of the automation tools that we use. It basically scans the page of the website and gives you a report on the issues it finds. So as you can see on the screen, on the left side, there is a number of overall issues it found, and they are also grouped according to their severity. On the right hand, you have these issues one by one. You can expand them and have the detailed information about each. For example, the location of the issue on the website, or even in the code, WCAG success criteria, which were violated in this case, and also possible solutions to the issues. Here we have xTools. This works pretty much the same as the previous tool and gives you the report as well, which is pretty much the same. The difference between those two tools is that X scans the page in its stable state, while Accessibility Toolkit can follow you while you are still navigating through the website and will add additional issues to the report. What is interesting about xTool is that it has a paid version based on AI. There are much more options here. As you can see, there is an option to scan only tables or scan the whole page for keyboard navigation to see only images or structure. The creator of X use human-centered AI, which means that the tool does not come to replace human beings. It rather suggests, gives options, and it's up to humans to decide whether they are staying with the current version or they want to change it to the proposed one. Computer vision, on the other hand, means that the tool actually can recognize the elements on the website, like videos and images, and it compares them to the actual code. Based on that information, it gives recommendations how to change the website in order to make it more accessible. When we think about AI, the first thing that probably comes to our mind is ChatGPT. I have to disappoint you, unfortunately, and neural networks don't work pretty much well for accessibility. This is because they work with a vast, very general data set and also code from all over the internet. That's in most cases not acceptable. Not accessible. But you can still use ChatGPT as an assistant. For example, our accessibility engineer uses ChatGPT while creating complicated elements. For example, if we are creating complicated table, we can ask ChatGPT to create a simple one, test it thoroughly with the tools or manually, and then add complications to it. Another use can be creating JavaScript code if you already have CSS and HTML markup ready. The third case can be when you want a specific success criteria which was evaluated in a particular situation. So you just describe the situation to ChatGPT and receive the particular success criteria. Along with the tools mentioned above, there are also AI-based widgets like Accessibility, UserWay, Equally AI. They are basically plugged into your project and can rewrite the code for you in order to make it more accessible. But they work pretty much well for not complicated projects, but still you have to check it and test it thoroughly before you implement it into your code, because sometimes these tools can ruin even existing accessibility. So be very, very careful while using them. Well, we've come to the end of our presentation. Is just to sum up the topics that we discussed, we saw what accessibility is and why it is important for all the people. We saw what is the structure of accessibility team, its main roles and responsibilities. We also saw what types of documentation are there for accessibility teams and accessibility tools that these teams use on the daily basis. Thank you so much for having me. I've prepared QR codes for useful links that can help you to start your accessibility journey. I hope these will be helpful for you, and also my contact information in case you have any questions. You can contact me and I will try to help you with any issue. Thank you so much again. And I think I'm getting back to you, Maria.
Inna, thank you very much for such a smooth transition and for such a wonderful, relevant, and meaningful presentation. We consider accessibility an extremely relevant topic for the contemporary society, and since we are focused on our values of development, integrity, and most importantly, care, we want to make sure that all our products and services are aligned with the requirements of accessibility. And from my heart, I thank you and the accessibility team for doing such an important job for the company and for everyone in the world who has ever been involved in fintech community, because this is something that we all should think about. So thank you so much. And we actually have a question right now. If you're still formulating it in your head, don't be shy to ask. And the first question comes from Thijs Leica. In advance, I apologize to everyone whose name I'm going to pronounce wrong. Please don't beat the pianist. He plays the way he can. So, is there a material or course about how to help people who has disabilities as QA?
Well, yes, there are lots of courses out there. You can use whatever platform you like. Udemy, for example, they have wonderful courses, and they're also on LinkedIn. I also have the links in, if you use my QR code, there are some materials that you can start with just to get to know about accessibility and what types of disabilities are there. I hope I answered the question.
Yes, Thijs, thank you very much for being patient with me and name pronunciation. Please let us know if Inna's reply was sufficient. And I'm pretty sure that everyone in this chat will benefit from scanning this QR code, not only with useful links, but also with contact information. In case you don't get the courage to ask the question right now in the chat, you can always reach out to Inna directly.
Absolutely.
And get the replies you need. Another question comes from Mariam Hutsishvili. Are there tools for iOS and Android devices together which can help us to test accessibility in our mobile apps?
Yes, there are. You can definitely check the accessibility on the mobile apps as well. We have automation tool for Android. Currently, it is called Accessibility Scanner. It is free of charge, and you can download it from the apps. Um, for iOS, at this point, we don't have automation tool, but still you can use the screen readers, which are for iOS, for example, they are already there and you have to just activate it from the settings. And for Android, we have TalkBack. So you can check it with the screen reader. It is a bit complicated, shall we say, for mobiles because you don't have this inspect element that you can check the HTML and CSS code. But anyways, as for the colors, you can, for example, test the design because it's up to developer to implement the correct color codes into the source. So you can also ask the developer, for example, to provide you with the codes they use in the code to check whether it is accessible or not, whether the contrast ratio is reached or not.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And Mariam actually asks the follow-up question, how accurate are those tools in percentage?
Well, all automation tools in percentage are around, I'd say 40% accurate. You can still like you should still use manual testing because you can't get 100% of coverage and check all the things. Because, for example, there are understanding success criteria as for all the text on the website and on the application has to be understandable in a particular way. So this can only be checked with manual testing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Mariam. We hope we answered your question. And I guess it is the last question for this session. Please remember that there is always the way to ask in your questions personally. Just follow the QR code. And for today, we have one more from Ivo. Do you feel that companies are becoming more conscious about the importance of accessibility?
I think yes, they are. And I hope very much that this acknowledgement will grow. Yes, there are openings also on accessibility QAs and accessibility engineers that prove that this work is needed. Testing accessibility and implementing accessible code is required. And especially for the countries that have laws, it is just must have.
Okay, thank you. We have another, I guess, adding question from Daniel Jr., but from a different perspective, are there any known and recommended resources to increase accessibility awareness for developers? Web is pretty advanced, but also desktop clients, regardless of operational system.
Yes, DQ University provides different kinds of courses for developers, for designers, and for the testers. So you can, it is also in my QR code. You can go and check it, and it is very, very informative and helpful, at least for the beginners. But everything about accessibility is related to experience, to just the testing, creating, asking. You have to all the times ask your colleagues to have the talks, brainstormings, because the knowledge after all comes after gaining experience.
Absolutely. Any knowledge comes with learning and gaining experience. And this phrase applies not only to studying accessibility, but I guess any skill.
Generally,
Yeah.
yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much again, Inna, for your wisdom and for your professionalism. Judging by the quantity of questions and their quality, of course, I see that people are very, very engaged in the topic. So thank you once again. And let's move on. And our next speaker is Elena Kulgava, Senior QA Engineer at Ideomatic. She's been helping companies to build better quality software for more than 10 years already. And as she claims, she's especially good at making order out of chaos and testing things that seem to be untestable. Let's see what she has to say. Elena, the stage is yours.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining and staying. My name is Elena, and I've been doing test automation for almost 15 years, with Python being my language of choice since 2013. And today I want to share with you the library, which is called Fields, and hopefully leave you with a few ideas of how to make testing a little easier and also more effective on your projects. Before we start, let me share my story of contract testing and a little bit more context on this topic. The story dates back to 2015 when I joined the company. The project was the microservice architecture. And when it comes to microservices, we usually imagine something like this, which is exactly the case, which was exactly the case on the project. And the architecture looks like a number of microservices, each of them having or not having the database. Those services communicate with each other. And in general, we have the gateway, which exposes the results of the break into the mobile or web client. And when it comes to testing the microservices, one additional challenge that we are facing is building and supporting the integrated environment when it comes to end-to-end testing, because we have like a place to deploy all of those services and connect them to each other. So it's mostly common to use the approach when we split the testing into parts and test every microservice separately. So the picture will look like this. We connect the microservice to its database and just check the functionality. And then we also check the gateway. And if we have a closer look at this chart, there is quite a big part of it untested, which is the connections between the microservices. And that's where the contract testing is happening. And it is important as being one of the ways to ensure that all the services fully covered with functional tests will still be effectively communicating with each other. And this part can actually replace the system test where we have all the parts of the system running together, as long as we ensure that those integrations and communications are tested. So let's have a look at the example and see what the contract testing is on a smaller picture. when it comes to the API, we usually talk about the producer service, which is actually the provides the API, which is the owner of the API. And then we may have one or multiple consumer services which actually use this API. And when we start testing the integration of those two, the system of like having the producer and consumer service, we usually start with the producer service to ensure that the API works. And those tests are pretty straightforward. We're just like making requests, check the functionality works as expected, whether it makes the calculation or changes the database state, and then check the responses also. Then when it comes to the consumer service, the situation is a bit more complicated as the functionality of the consumer depends on how the producer service works, which means that we will have to have the producer service in order to check the functionality of the consumer. And in testing, we usually try to not use the real one, but fake the producer with mocks. And when it comes to mocking, we usually think the first thing we think of is mocking responses because that would enable us checking the functionality of the consumer as it depends on the responses from the mock service. Though another very important part of testing this communication is verifying requests the consumer service is making to the producer service. As we are mocking, we are not sure whether those requests are possible, where they are fine, where the data is correct. That's why we have to check them in addition to those mocked responses that we use for functional testing. And those two types of tests, they actually form part of the contract testing. And when I get back to this picture, we and see how like the whole testing ecosystem for this combination works. In the producer service, we just have the tests. And then in the consumer service, we have those functional tests with response mocked. And on top of that, we have the tests that verify how the requests are performed. And then when it comes to checking the contract, the tricky thing is that we have to take the consumer tests and pass them to the producer service. Next time the producer is changing the API, they just have to run the consumer tests and to see if the new version is compatible. And there we can find not only the schema compatibility, but also in cases where we like invest a bit more in the sharing business entity and like sharing data models between the tests, and we can also find the functional incompatibility between the services. So that's like the basis of the contract testing. And let's get back to the project, to the microservice ecosystem, and see how we navigated testing and implementing this contract testing on the project. So it started with the very simple framework, as this is like usually the best approach we can choose, just like use the simplest way of navigating the issue and then try to see how the system evolves and also evolve the task in addition. So we started with very simple layer of the contract itself. I must admit that that was back in 2015, so the language was not that advanced. We didn't have all of the tools we have at the moment, but at least we could build the dictionary as like the contract, the structure of the request and the or response. And we also could specify which fields in this dictionary are required and which are not. And then on top of that, another layer was added for generating the data. As if you have ever done mocking the requests in the tests and the responses, you must know that they not necessarily influence the test objective. So though they influence the execution of the function, which means that sometimes we just need function to run, and regardless of what is returned from the service, we will still be able to verify the test objective in the test. That's why we just have to generate some valid data, like some data that will be parsed and let the system work. that's why we added this additional layer of that allowed us to generate the data. But it only generated the minimum required value. And that approach, to be honest, worked really well during quite a long period of time on this ecosystem. But as it usually happens to microservices, the system from this structure came to this, which was like obviously is schematic version, so it's not like the real project. But the most complicated part here is not visible, and it is communication between the services, which we have to test. In addition to the amount of those tasks we had to implement because of all of this, all of those communications, we started facing the compatibility issues between the services, because we only cared in our contracts, we only cared on the fact whether the filter is required or not. And then we started facing the issues where the types were incompatible or the length of the screen was not acceptable by either the producer or the consumer. And we had to spend like quite a lot of time firefighting those issues. And the temporary solution at that time was just to have some additional tests that would validate those contracts like synthetically. And we ended up in a situation we had so many tests like checking these contracts that a single line of code change in the API could cost us days of QA work to maintain the change in all of the tests we had. That was the point of time where I started thinking of how we can evolve our framework and tool for the contract testing. And obviously, I started from the requirements to the tool. So here they are. First, and that was only partially fulfilled with the solution we had in-house, was supporting the API schema. And that was also for any limitation having enumeration in different types. And then we also needed to generate valid data based on the schema, not like manually add that additional layer with describing how to generate the data, as it was quite complex, but it was superimposed on the situation where we had embedded structures like dictionaries or a list included in other dictionaries. Then we obviously wanted it to be JSON compatible for our API to work. Another thing that was completely missing was the code completion or like type hinting, as the result of generating the data was a JSON or the dictionary. We could only operate with the keys where we had to store it. So you can imagine the situation where in the consumer service, we have to go and read the documentation of the producer just to know how the structure looks like and what are the keys. Not mentioning the situation where we can like misspell the key and ruin completely like the test suite. And then obviously we wanted it to be reusable for producer and consumer for the whole flow that they share to work. So first we started with checking what's there on the market. And unfortunately, the best solution I found was satisfying the 3 out of 5 requirements, with myself not being able to compromise on the other 2. I started thinking of implementing something like inventing the solution that would address our pains. And that's why today I'm happy to introduce you Phil, the contract testing library, and the topic of my talk today. So Field allows us to describe the contracts between the microservices or any other services. And as inspired by many other solutions, it uses the classes for defining the structure. But let's just have a closer look on how it addresses the requirements and solves the issue that we had. So first requirement was supporting the API schema. And Fields allows us to set the data types, but also specify any limitations we have on the length or minimum maximum value. It obviously separates the required and not required fields, enumerations, and if you're still missing something, you can create your own data type and describe how to generate data, which are the conditions you would like to set being the contracts of your API. And the tricky part here is specifying the name. So field works in a way that we use the same constructor base for both for describing the schema and also for the second layer with validating the data. And under the hood field understands that if we are specifying the name, then now we are at the layer of defining the schema. So that's essential part. And that's also how the data will be represented in the serialized view when being transferred over the API. When it comes to generating the data, the approach is a bit more simpler with comparing to the previous version. And we're just calling the constructor, and because we're not setting the name, it generates the data based on what we described, whether it's a dictionary, a complex type, or just a simple type, it will still generate the data. And we can specify this as full parameter to also generate values for the fields that were not required, like gender in this case. Then, because of the output being dictionary, it's obviously JSON compatible. Then when it comes to code completion, we benefit from having the classes because we know the structure at every point of time. So every time we use the producer API in our consumer task, we don't have anymore to investigate the API. We just have the type hinting at every point, regardless of the number of levels of embedding in the structures. When it comes to reusing for a producer and consumer, if you already have mocking, so it's just about how you describe the data. But if you don't, this is the example of how you can implement the API method that can be used for producer and consumer. Here you can use the utility library for the field, which is called Field API Hub. And it provides the tool for creating mocks over HTTP with the use of field for describing the structures. With the API method being just the combination of the parameters required for describing the call. Here we have the HTTP method, the URL, and the structure of request and response. Now, when it comes to consumer tasks, we can use this API method to either mock the request, and when mocking, we can use the normally generated response, or we can also have the error response simulated where we have the producer service unavailable or not being able to process the request. And then we obviously can check how the call is performed. For that, we have the verify calls where we can specify the parameters we want to check, whether they are the request parameters, headers, or body. When it comes to producer, we are using the same API method for just making the requests and then verifying the response. So this is pretty straightforward. And let's have a closer look at how it transforms our current situation on the project. So when it comes to describing the contracts, because we combine two layers into single one was replacing the initial approach with field library. It's reduced the costs almost to 50%, but it also increased the readability of what's written there, what is in the API. And one thing that is a bit less obvious here was the data generation, as for those situations where we had to generate the full entity, we no longer have to like set the values for those fields that are not required. We just have to specify the parameter of whether we want like regular one or a full. And then the results are even more impressive when we're talking about the embedding structure, like reusing dictionaries inside of other dictionaries. And here is such example. And as you can see, it still reduces the code for the contract for 50%. But the results are even more impressive for the code generation, as it's like way more readable, which also influences the time for supporting those tasks in the future. So as a result, we had this reduction of code for the library up to 50%. But when it comes to those tasks where we had to check the validation, because of field library and the schema and all the generated values, we've been able to replace those tasks with like auto-generated based on the contract. And in the worst case, we in our worst microservice, we got cut reduction of 70%. So 70% of task code has been deleted by just like replacing it with generating data based on field. What else we can do with this library is describing database models, generating data for business entities where we can make a combination of like a separate API calls or just parts of the API, and also the database models and some form data. We can tie them together and make dependent. We can merge third-party services, though we are not like testing their APIs. We can still use Field and Field API Hub to describe the API and use it for mocks. We can, because of field entities being classes, we can extend the functionality and add any custom attributes we want to add, like API to database converters. If we have stored files for UI tasks, we can replace them with data generators based on fields, which will increase the speed of supporting changes when we have to modify the schema. We won't have to replace all of those JSON files with the new ones. We can use it for generating invalid data for contracts. If we don't use mocking for the UI task, this is the tool you can use for starting. You just have to describe the backend contracts and replace the real backend with the mock service. And you can also check the API version and compatibility by just like creating a separate version and a separate file, and then replacing the imports in the consumer tabs. And anything else you can think of, the only thing you need to do is just install the library with pip. That's it, and thank you for your attention. I'm sharing links to my LinkedIn and the GitHub, so you can check the code and also submit any feedback or ask any questions. But now we will also have the time for questions and answers.
Yeah, thank you very much, Elena, for your presentation. We're very glad to have you as guest tonight, and I really hope that you enjoyed presenting to us as much as we enjoyed your presentation, which is a lot. And yeah, I remind to all of our viewers right now that we have time for question and answers. So please feel free to type your question in the chat, and Elena is going to answer them right away here. But in case you don't have time or you're watching this in recording, you can always scan the QR code and reach out to Elena directly. While we're waiting for answers, Elena, what made you choose the field library?
The library.
No, it's not the library. I'm sorry. I am not a technical person. So while I was watching the presentation, I was looking at the code like, wow. And then like field, and I started singing all the field songs that I knew: Strawberry Fields Forever, Sky Blue and Field of Green in our Yellow Submarine.
You mean the name?
Yeah.
I see.
What made you choose it?
So when it comes to the, yeah, I didn't get the question. Sorry. So when it comes to like describing all of the APIs, we usually use this word fields for like whether it's like fields of the request or field of the response. So it's common, pretty natural. Though I didn't want to use the word field as is more of very generic. So I didn't want to block anyone else from using that as well. And also not being like super specific and super generic in that one. That's why I just like shortened it a little bit, but still preserving the pronunciation so people can associate it with what it does.
Okay. Thank you. I was genuinely interested about the etymology of the word, no more, no less. But there are actually new questions that ask about this area of expertise.
It is great and very powerful, and I use it for the project where I have to implement like any communication with other services. But unfortunately, when we talk about testing and the tools, most of the tools, especially the good ones, they are developed for the developers, for the code development, not for testing, which makes them either too smart or too specific, and it makes it hard to extend the functionality or like find the way to enhance a little bit just to address our needs. And when it comes to Pedantic, it's like really great in validating the schema, but it's not what we need. Like we want to describe the schema and we want to validate, but not only schema, but also data. And what is missing, and that's very essential part, and that what causes us like reducing the amount of code is generating the data based on the schema. And in the Pedantic, like we would have to, create another library based on Pedantic that would do this. So a lot of things that used in Pedantic are not like applicable for the testing. This is also valid for the SQL alchemy, which can be used for describing the database models. But then when it comes to using it for testing, because it's like being too smart and preserving the state, it also influences the test. Like we can get false positive tests just because the SQL alchemy having those records mutable and like preserving the updating the information based on the action we take.
Okay. Mariana, thank you very much for the question. We hope that we answered it. Please let us know in the chat. And we have another question. Is Field compatible with PyTest and Allure within one project?
Yes, absolutely. I personally use it with PyTest, and I use it with Allure when I needed the reports, but it's actually used for data generation. So you don't have to like it doesn't influence any of your steps or how you like do the setups for run the tests. You just like use it for your structures. And when it comes to the API hub, which is like that additional library based on fields, though it has the steps for creating mocks or verifying the calls or making the request, you can always customize that, like inherit from the class and add the reporting steps for the aloo.
Okay, Kirill, let us know if we answered your question. Thank you very much, by the way. Well, there are so many questions about the application, practical application of the technology that you were describing, and it means that we have a very relevant audience today. It is a happy event for me. So, conocer, again, excuse me if I'm doing it wrong. Elena, thank you very much again. What will be your advice? From where should I start if I have front-end E2E tests in my company?
That's a great question. And I have like a very simple recipe on how to move those like end-to-end tests into the lower level with the help of Field and the Field's API hub. So the first thing you should do is detach the front end from the backends in tests. And in order to do that, you have to create mocks that will replace your backend. And for that, you can use the Field and the Field API hub. So you can review back, scroll back the slides that I shared and see the examples, but also check them on the PyPy. There I also put some information on how to implement. And once you have the backend replaced, you can start experimenting with the data, which will enhance your coverage, but also make the test more stable. And then once you master a little bit, you can go into testing the backends with the help of the contracts you already described for the front-end test. Let me know if I answered, and if not, please send me a message on the LinkedIn and we can discuss.
Yeah, thank you very much for a wonderful conversation. And actually, Elena says the right thing, even if you don't have the courage or for any other reason, like you're watching us in the recording, you don't know how to ask the question in the chat. Please feel free to reach out to our presenters and ask them directly. We're always welcome. We're always open to communication with all of you. And from what I understand, we don't have any more questions, which means that we've come to the end of our wonderful webinar. Inna, Elena, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for your engaging presentations about relevant topics that you've shared. Yeah, I wish everyone in this webinar, both presenters and the viewers, a wonderful, fulfilling evening. If there is something that you should not test in this life, is the abilities of your physical body. So have nutritious meal, drink a sufficient amount of water, and try to go out and have a breath of fresh air today, because it is important. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay knowledgeable. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn to get notified about the events like this in the future. And goodbye. Have a great evening.